All right, we are recording. So welcome everybody. This is our third week on Islam. We're scheduled to have a fourth one next week. The one thing I didn't know what Trinity's plans were as far as usually adult ed ends in the summer, but I don't know what happens when there's a coronavirus. We haven't gone through that before. So we'll have to talk.
My perception is that the rules are all changed.
All right.
So if you want to go on, I'm sure there will be people who will continue until things will shift. If we are able to meet our target date for in-person worship of July 12th.
Yeah.
That schedule will probably not allow for an in-between Sunday school hour because we'll be trying to get people in and out of the building for two services quickly. So we'll need to reschedule the time.
Yeah.
But until then, whatever you want to do is awesome. Can I ask a favor for next week?
Sure.
I am going to be away on continuing ed, and I'm going to be leading worship at Lakeside, where I am at continuing ed, or helping to lead worship. And the preacher there is excellent. So I'm going to, instead of creating a Trinity distance worship, I'm going to invite Trinity to worship with me at Lakeside virtually, live streamed at 10:30.
Oh, okay.
And I think they're recording it, but I need to double check. So I just wondered if you could tweak the time of this.
Yeah, we could move up earlier. We could do 9:30.
Yeah, and then
that
people
works.
can do because I think some people might enjoy the live stream.
Yeah, that would be great.
But I'll get all that information for you. But that's next week only, the 21st.
Okay, and since this is the last week we had scheduled a whole bunch renewing Zooms, we thought things would be closer to normal by now, but we all keep guessing. So we have to reschedule anyway, so we can set the next one up for 9:30. And since next week will end Islam, begin thinking for our conversation of what we want to do next. Let me pull up my screen for you. I know some have missed and I've done a bad job of recording, so let me just kind of show where we've been. All right, can everybody see that?
Yes.
We good? All right. So we're our third week, and we did history. Last week were key beliefs, which I'll just throw up real fast if you missed those. Today we're going to talk through Islamic life. Things like life rituals and life cycle, holidays, just different odds and ends of what Islam looks like. And again, they're really general because every culture adapts to kind of how they do these things. So you can't say like, this is what Islam does broader than a few basic kinds of elements, because then every culture kind of has its perspective. And the next week we'll kind of pull together what we share and what are key distinctions between Islam and Christianity. We talked about this plenty, but just a reminder, Islam, it's about submission. It means to submit to God, and a Muslim is one who submits. And Allah is the Arabic word for God. It's a generic. Again, it's not a proper noun. So all people in all religions who speak Arabic, who talk of God, call him Allah. All right, that is not specifically a term for Muslims. And then we went through last week the 6 beliefs, that there's one God alone, belief in angels, belief in holy books. And most people think, well, Muslims, the only holy book is the Quran, but that's not true. They believe in the Torah of Moses. They believe in the Psalms of David. They believe in the Gospels of Jesus. And then the Quran is the final book. But again, that is the lens through which everything else is seen. So the same way, the Jewish Bible is still part of our holy book, but we read it through the lens of New Testament. The same way, all of those holy books are read through the lens of Quran. Belief in prophets. And there were many, many prophets all around the world. And the ones that we know of in the Bible, holy prophets, were prophets to Muslims as well. And Jesus is one of the great prophets to them. They believe in a last judgment where everyone will stand before God and be judged based on their deeds and whether they submitted to the will of God or not. And last, Islam has a very strong view of predestination or destiny, this idea that God has set the world and how things will go. And we are to be submitting also to God's will for, the way the world works. So this idea of sometimes we just don't want the answers we get and we fight against it. Good Muslims say, inshallah, if God wills it, and they kind of live life with that mindset. And the 5 pillars, most people know these, the declaration of faith. There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is the messenger of God. That's what you need to say to proclaim that you are a Muslim. 5 times a day you pray. Every year you are to give 2% of your wealth over and above what you need to survive. Fasting in the 9th month, the month of Ramadan, and we'll talk more about that a little bit today. And then at some point in your life, if you are able, you are to make the pilgrimage to Mecca. And we'll talk some about that again as well. So those are the 5 basic pillars, and those are the 6 basic beliefs. Okay. Any questions about those? People from last week who we went through those, something come to mind? Or is there anything for people who maybe weren't with us last week that you want to ask about any of those? All right.
I bought the book that you recommended, and I've been reading it. You're almost like parroting it, I guess, but it's interesting.
Say that again, Fred.
I bought the book that you had recommended, and I just got it on Monday or Tuesday this week, and I've been reading in it.
Oh, okay.
It's pretty consistent with what you've been saying.
Oh, good. I'm staying on track then. That's a good sign. All right, here's one of the things I talked about last week that I want us to experience now for Bill and Kathy. Hopefully this brings back good memories. For the rest of you, we talked about the call to prayer and what that sounds like. This and every there's the key things. Allahu Akbar, God is great, God is great. Things are repeated. Then it's the no God but God, Muhammad is prophet. Come to prayer, come to prayer, come to prayer, and then it works its way back out. But each caller has their own unique style and melody and cadence. This is from the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is up on the Temple Mount. And you're going to hear the whole call to prayer, and the person who hears it will go inside the mosque, which typically they don't like visitors. So either he's a Muslim or he's sneaky. But either way, you get to see inside, and we didn't get to see inside on our trip, but you will get to here. So let me pull this up. Can you hear?
Yeah. This sounds like a bunch of odds.
Now I can't hear it.
Yeah, it's real faint, Dean.
Faint?
We also can't see if we're supposed to have a video.
Did you say it went, you can't see it?
There's no video.
All right, let me do it a different way because you need to see this. All right, I've had this issue with when I embed videos
Yeah.
in a PowerPoint that they don't show up. Let me go to the actual site. All right, 1 second.
We need some WD-40 on that.
Sure.
Okay, let me all right, let's try this again. Let me share a different screen. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Can you
There
see
we go.
can you see the image? All right,
Yeah.
Yes.
let me do this again.
Yes, yes.
Can you hear it?
Much better. Up. Can't hear it now.
All right. Um, that gives you a picture, one, of what the call to prayer sounds like. Now imagine 5 times a day you hear that echoing through the streets, and you are just right at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, so you're hearing that one. But if you were back, a few blocks away, you'd also be hearing the other calls from the other minarets throughout the city. So like it echoes around the city, which is a powerful thing. The Al-Aqsa Mosque is the third holiest site in Islam. It was built in 705. It's been rebuilt because of fire and other things, but could you see when they were going in the door, you could also see the pock marks from the bullet. And, there's been a lot of things happen up on the Temple Mount because the Dome of the Rock, the mosque behind it is believed to be where in Muhammad's night journey, he ascended up into heaven from the flat stone that the Dome of the Rock was built over. And to make it even more complicated, if you go back into tradition, Jews and Christians believe that rock was originally where Abraham nearly sacrificed Isaac on Moriah or Mount Moriah. And then that became the threshing floor that David buys and Solomon builds the temple over. So you have these multiple layers of religious tradition linked to that one spot, which kind of like Michener's the source is why everyone wants that spot, because it's the holy site. A lot of people don't realize that during the Crusades, when the Christians took over and captured the Temple Mount again, they put a cross at the top of the Dome of the Rock, and that became a church for a little while. And then we lost it back, and it's been a mosque ever since. But again, that's one of those kind of like religious history stories. But anyway, that's what the call to prayer sounds like. If you go to the Middle East fairly often, or you've spent time there, that becomes a beautiful sound. For some, your first night there, it freaks you out a little bit, but we get over that. All right, let me go back to where we were, and let's talk about some life cycle stuff. All right. Can you see the PowerPoint?
Yeah, now, yes.
For some reason, it's not going into, let me pull out 1 second and try this one more time. It's not going to normal mode. There we go. All right, birth rituals. All religions have different rituals around birth, and in Islam, that call to prayer when a baby is born is the first thing that's to be whispered by the father into the ear of the child. So it's as if the first thing they ever hear will be the call to prayer. Then there's this other tradition, which goes back to something Muhammad did. This idea that the first thing the child should taste to think about life is something sweet. And so parents will like chew up a date and then just rub that on the lip of the child.
We're talking about females and male children?
Yes. And that should kind of give them this first experience of life that, that it's to be tasted and be sweet. And then seventh day is a big day. The baby's head is shaved, and they're also named. And this is similar to in Hinduism. In Hinduism, the head is shaved on the seventh day, and the hair is scattered on the Ganges. In Islam, they're supposed to weigh out the hair, and then that weight of silver is to be donated to charity. So I know some people, you want your baby to be born with lots of hair. If you're a Muslim, you probably want them to have very little to kind of keep the price down. Also, boys are circumcised in Islam, and that often happens on the seventh day. But again, this is one of those things that's just cultural to different parts of the Islamic world. It has to just be done sometime before puberty, right? And so, depending on the culture and the place, those things kind of shift. But so there are these rituals around birth. Most of the other rituals that are universal about being a Muslim are really related to the pillars. So it's about the prayer 5 times a day. It's about Ramadan. And it's about Hajj if one can afford to do that. Marriage is also, again, in any religious situation, right? There are different religious ideas around marriage. Traditionally in Islam, arranged marriages were the order of the day. That still happens in some places and parts of the world. Again, Western and, more modern cultures, Western cultures, that tends not to happen anymore. But there is this real emphasis on the idea of, right, you're just not marrying people, you're linking and connecting families. And there's often a lot of thoughtfulness to that. But again, that's changing in places like America and Europe. Now, one of the things that is kind of controversial around marriage in Islam is that polygamy is still allowed. So Muslim men can have up to 4 wives, but this practice is declining. In the Quran, it says that, you can have up to 4 wives, but you have to be able to care for them all equally, and you're to care about them all equally. And if you can't do those, you're not supposed to. It's interesting because I've had this conversation with some guides and folks in Jordan. I don't tend to hear about this in like the West Bank or, people I'm connected to in Israel, but it seems like the more, again, the more Western, the more this really doesn't happen. But again, the role and position of women in the Middle East has, been, to say lacking, is an understatement in places, but that's changing. Where you see this the most is like in Bedouin cultures, where they're still kind of semi-nomadic and outside the normal kind of practices of civilization, and they're off kind of doing their thing. You see and hear about more of this. But again, it is still allowed. It's not seen as like in Christianity, right, where that was doing away with what you saw on the nomadic lives that are described in the Old Testament. Again, we can get into all the anthropology around polygamy, but anyway, this is still part of Islam. Ceremonies are very simple. It's mostly reading from the Quran. There need to be 2 witnesses. And one of the interesting things that I read, which again goes into some of the views of women standing in society, the woman doesn't even technically need to be there. They can just have witnesses, and they kind of read through the vows, and someone, kind of reads off and accepts on her behalf. Again, if you went to a Muslim wedding, though, in the United States, it would probably look a whole lot like any other wedding you've ever seen before. So again, this is one of those things where the culture affects the way the traditions play out. And again, that's for most religions. If you saw, again, a Jewish wedding in America, it would look pretty much like a Christian wedding in America with a few key symbolic differences. But if you went to a Jewish wedding in Yemen, it would look extremely different because it would have more to do with Yemeni culture. So similarly around marriage. And then death and burial. The last, is someone is dying, like in Christianity and Catholic Christianity, right? You have last rites as they're dying. the last words that are to be heard, we begin with the call to prayer. And as someone is dying, the shahada, the there is no God but God, and Muhammad is the messenger of God, is the last thing that is to be said into their ear. After death, the body is washed. And then there's this other tradition that is different than, right, what we do in Christianity. In Christianity, we put you in your best clothes. In Islam, they say, look, you came into the world naked and you will leave naked. So they wash the body and then they wrap it in a white cloth. But I mean, if you can think about some of the, again, and it's terrible, these images are always typically connected to violence. But when we see on TV funeral processions, in the Muslim world, you will often see people carrying a body tightly wrapped, or sometimes it's in a very simple casket, and they're taking it to burial. But the idea of a big fancy casket like we have in the West, there's simple boxes or no box at all. And then it's just a body tightly wound, like it would look like a mummy. And then again, when they're buried, their head is to face Mecca. Okay. So again, simple rituals. There is a simplicity to Islam. If you read like sociology of religion and things like that, some have argued that the power of Islam and its spread in some ways is tied to its simplicity, because it's easily adaptable to all kinds of places as it moves around the world. And so as you can see in these, there's not a lot around ritual that is central to Islam itself. Now here are the two big holidays. The first one just happened recently, Eid al-Fitr. This is the end of Ramadan. So remember how we said in Ramadan, you cannot eat or drink anything, not water, nothing, during the daylight hours. So there's a light meal, pre-dawn. There's a sense of festivity in eating after dark. But at the end of that is a major holiday. And there's feasting, family come together, people travel. Like when you think about Christmas, Thanksgiving, all those kinds of things, and the idea of huge family time around a celebration, this is Eid al-Fitr. And again, it doesn't have a fixed time in our calendar because of the wandering of the Muslim calendar. There are no intercalculary days or months, and so this lunar calendar weaves, circles around the year. And so, like, where are we now? We're in June. This year, this I think was the end of May. And so this is one of the major holidays. The other major holiday is Eid al-Adha. And this is during the 12th month of the year, which is the pilgrimage festival. So now again, pilgrimage is one of the major pillars and part of life cycle for Muslims who can afford it. You don't just go whenever you can. It's like, hey, when are we going to take our vacation this year? It happens in the 12th month, the last month of the year. Muslims come from all over the world, and there is this long process of a couple of weeks that you go through. One of the things that happens during this time is the Eid al-Adha, and in this ritual, it is commemorating Abraham's sacrifice of the ram. Now, the difference in the telling of this story by Muslims is it was not Isaac that he almost sacrificed, but it was Ishmael. All right, and so in a Quranic reading of that story, it tells differently in the Quran, because there is this, now hear me, this is a Quranic tradition that Christians and pop culture has absorbed. In the Quran, you have, let me back up for a second. Islam sees itself as a revelation of God to the Arab peoples that pulls it into the tradition of the Jews and the Christians. Okay? And in doing that, then, they are interpreting through a Quranic lens the Jewish and Christian traditions in a uniquely Muslim way. So when Muslims read our holy books through their lens, they are seeing, where do we fit in this story? And there's an interesting tradition that says this whole, right, Abraham is our father, and there is this great divide in the story, right, where first comes Ishmael, but then in the end, it's Isaac who's the chosen. In Islam, they believe it was actually the son of Hagar, Ishmael, who is the chosen line, who becomes the Arab peoples. Okay?
Right.
That I want this to be really clear. That is an interesting tradition, but it's just that. There's no history, there's no anthropology, there's no genetic link. In the Bible, Ishmael's people become the Ishmaelites. All right? And what happened to the Ishmaelites? The same thing that happened to the Girgashites and the Hivites and the Hittites and all those other. They disappear and nobody ever hears from them in history again. But in Islam, there is this tradition that equates Ishmaelites to Arabs, i.e. Muslims. We have to be really careful because through this weird backdoor interpretation, some Christians now read the passages that say some kind of negative things about Ishmaelites, right? How they'll be, you know, the wild ass of a man and they'll be at contention with their brother and all this stuff. And then they extrapolate out and go, well, of course, there's all this conflict between Arabs and Jews. It was prophesied. It wasn't prophesied. It was prophesied about Ishmaelites and the children of Isaac. Those Ishmaelites you can only accept as the Arabs as if you trust in the Quran's retelling of history. But you see how interesting that is that we've absorbed that into popular Christian tradition to go, well, of course the Arabs and the Jews will always be at war because it was prophesied in Genesis. It wasn't. Only in a Quranic extension of a Quranic tradition. Anyway, that's a tangent, but I think it's an important one as we watch the Middle East continue to spiral. This festival in the 12th month during the pilgrimage festival, at some point in it, there is the purchasing of a lamb or a goat. There's the slaughtering of it and the cooking of it and the feasting on it. And then you can't eat a whole lamb. The rest of it's given to charity. This is what you do if you are on pilgrimage. Even if you're not on pilgrimage and you're just a Muslim sitting in Cincinnati, Ohio, or Toledo, or wherever, during this time, you also will have a feast and you will donate to charity. All right. And so these are the two major holidays in Islam, in the 9th month and in the 12th month. Now, there are other holidays, small ones that commemorate different things and different holy men, but those are related to certain sects. So like if you're a Shia Muslim, there are different holy men in different parts of the world that you might commemorate. But for the whole tradition of Islam, these are the two main holidays. All right. And I wanted to show you one other thing. And I'm gonna do this differently so we don't have to go through let me copy this now so we don't have to go through the process if you can't see it or read it. I want you to see this powerful, powerful ritual. Again, not all not all people in Islam will get this opportunity because it's very expensive to make a trip to Mecca and do the Hajj. But if they do, this is a powerful experience, which is often a life-changing memory. So let me set this up.
Distance. It's made it clear that the best memories don't happen miles apart. They happen.
Okay, let me come back to you now. All right, let me share my screen. So if you make the Hajj, if you ever see a Muslim that has, it looks like a middle name, Haji, that means at some point in their life, they've made the Hajj, they've made pilgrimage. Okay, so if I made Hajj at some point as a Muslim, I would become Dean Haji Nicholas. Okay. Now, what's really interesting is at some point, Christian Arabs started doing the same thing if you made pilgrimage to Jerusalem. So my Lebanese and Syrian relatives, who were all Christian, must have gone to Jerusalem because my great-great-grandfather had a Haji element. And so that became part of our family name. So Hajnullah somehow became Nicholas when it came into the US. So people always think, oh, Nicholas, you must be Greek. No, it was just a butchered transliterating. But let me, if you make this journey and you do the 2 weeks, okay, can people see my screen?
Yeah.
Yep.
The Kaaba, this big black box, is believed to be this ancient, well, it was an ancient temple, but it was believed to go all the way back to Adam in tradition. This is where Muhammad went and all the idols were that he cast out and broke. And this became, it's weird because in this anti-symbol, anti-icon, anti-image religion, this one image was allowed to stay. It was seen to be this holy spot that we make pilgrimage to. And it commemorates, remember the first week when we talked about the history, the people left and went to Medina and then they marched back to Mecca. And then they circled this, they pulled out the idols and destroyed it. The pilgrimage kind of like rehearses those steps. The same way we would do the Stations of the Cross, right? Or we'd make some kind of pilgrimage. They're like journeying back with Muhammad to the Kaaba. And they circle it 7 times, but notice it's counterclockwise, which is intentional in this mindset that it's like out of time. It's like time stands still and we go backwards around a clock. And some people do it faster and some people do it slower, but everyone is in their own pace circling the Kaaba. And so I want us, it's a short little video, but I want us just to watch to see this.
Yours is in the middle.
It's amazing what a fresh perspective can teach us. Help realize our fish isn't about catching
All right.
fish, and the vacation doesn't mean going far away. Look the home that makes the vacation with Verbo.
Wait. Let me stop the. All right. So that gives you a sense of the scope about the number of people who come from around the world to participate in this overwhelming experience. And again, if you've read Malcolm X's autobiography, or if you've seen the movie, right? If you know his life story, his whole mindset about his call and what he was to do and how he was to engage changes when he has that experience. When he dresses like everyone else, when he's in the Arabic word for the people is ummah. It's cognate to in Hebrew. You hear Am Israel, people of Israel, the ummah, the people, the community. When he experiences this oneness, which is a big thing in Islam, tawheed, that all things are unified in one, he realizes violence and conflict is not the way, but that God calls all people to oneness and wholeness and unity. Now he's assassinated soon after that, so we don't see what the post-Haji Malcolm X looks like. I have this, Julie doesn't know this and she's listening in, but I have this bucket list thing in my life that at some point, despite the strict guarding of who gets in and you have to be a Muslim to get into Mecca, I want to do that. So I don't know if that means I just have to go spy mode and sneak, if I got to like convert for a year. I don't know what it's going to take. But at some point, I too have a goal. One of my 5 pillars is I want to go to Mecca and do that. And I just can't imagine being part of that process. There is a video that I used to show in class of some man who somehow gets in and films, and it's just hearing his recounting of it. So anyway, if anybody wants to go with me, we'll figure it out. We have to time it up so that in the lunar year, it's the year pilgrimage hits during my summer break.
Yeah.
And I'll probably take you back after you have done that conversion for a year, but we'll have to see.
That's right. We could have a conversion back. We'll have to do it before Easter, and then I can loop back in.
Yeah.
Do we know what is happening this year with the pilgrimage given COVID-19? There's not a lot of physical distance.
No, and you know what? Between the pilgrimage and between prayer, right? Like you saw all the red marks on the floor where everyone's supposed to stand. I have not looked into that, but I thought about it as I was preparing. I need to see because kind of like the Orthodox Jewish community, they're kind of looking at this right now like, virus schmirus, we're just going to do what the Talmud tells us to do. And I would imagine a good portion of the Muslim world might take that same attitude. And I would be shocked if Saudi Arabia said, we're not going to do the pilgrimage this year. Because one, as a religious state that functions under Sharia law, that would be quite incredible in and of itself. That, as you can imagine, the boon to their economy of having these people come from all over the world. So that will be something interesting to watch. That should be in a couple months from now. Maybe they're going to do the whole, hey, they say heat kills it, and it's really hot in Saudi Arabia in the middle of summer. That's gonna be my guess, but I'll start Googling that after this. Anyway,
Dean, when you say the Hajj, it's men and women?
yes.
Okay.
Yep. And you know, when we have this conversation, when I take field trips to the mosque, it's kind of interesting, like hearing some of the guides talk about, like it becomes like this family vacation. And because of the mosque, where it's located in Cincinnati, right? You have a lot of well-to-do Muslim families. If you think of the Muslim community in Cincinnati, all the people in the medical community, most people in the history of Islam, you think of it's the elderly who've gotten their families out of their houses, who've been able to save for a long time, and then right post-retirement they go make Hajj. But in places like America and Westchester and Toledo, Ohio, you have like young families going and taking all their children, and it becomes this really cool religious family vacation. And again, the other thing is if like you often think of a situation, if you have to wait till you're older, if you have to wait until you raise the money, sometimes it's an arduous journey, right? It's a couple weeks. There's a lot of walking. Some people are like, I just can't physically do it. Well, the Quran says that if you couldn't do it and you gave the money for someone else, they can do it in your stead. And so you can complete the pillar by basically being the patron for someone else to do it, which also happens.
Well, so then do they get credit for going also, or is it just they have to go on their own?
Then the other person has to go on their own. Yep.
Okay.
So there are people who have done it multiple times where they're kind of like, well, I did it for my parents, and then I did it for me. Yeah. All right, so I know that was a lot in a short period, but any other questions about, the one other thing about life cycle and just kind of living is that there are also dietary guides. You will see restaurants or groceries that say halal. Halal refers to, it's the equivalent of the Jewish kosher, right? It's the okay to eat. Muslims are allowed to eat most things, but they cannot eat pigs, animals that are strangled, or animals that are either die of natural causes or are killed by other animals. All right, so no eating roadkill, it has to be intentionally slaughtered and it can't be strangled. Like Judaism, they can't consume blood, and they're not allowed to eat birds of prey. But you can eat things that you might have hunted with a bird of prey. So like if you're a falconer that gets you a rabbit, you can still have the Hassenpfeffer. That's not considered like an animal killing an animal because you use the animal as your weapon. Also in Islam, there is no drinking of alcohol. Supposed to be a teetotaling religion. You can have alcohol in things if it's cooked off. And you can use alcohol to clean and do things like that, but you cannot imbibe. Okay. But there is a rule in the Quran, the law of necessity. It says, if you're gonna starve and you got pork chops around, you can break the rule. Okay, Judaism is similar, right? If a life is at stake, any rule out of the Talmud can be superseded. All right. Any other questions or comments?
I missed the name of the book that Fred was talking about.
Fred, were you talking about Karen Armstrong, A Short History of Islam?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Karen Armstrong has also done a nice little biography of Muhammad as well. She's like a good go-to for a quick, kind of popular level synopsis of things.
That'd be my speed.
Yeah, it's helpful, right? It's a helpful, quick read. Anything else? All right, well, next week, we will try to pull all this together and say, all right, so how do we and Islam compare, contrast, align, do life together? And talk about the idea that there has been a lot of conflict in our world around Islam in the West and where that comes from and what that means. We'll look at that next week.
9:30.
At 9:30, that's right. I'll set it up now. We'll have the link. I don't forget, and I wonder where we all are.
It's good to see everybody.
It is. It is really good. Let me pray for us before we.
Thank you.
God, I thank you for your goodness and your faithfulness. We thank you for your grace and mercy to all. God, be with us. Let us be your light in a difficult time of pain, conflict, anger, fear. As the world around us seems to be crumbling, God, let us be your people. Let us be your love. Let us be your mercy. Let us be your kindness, your goodness. Let people see us and see that God is at work in the world. God, be with us this day, we pray, in Christ's name.
Amen.
All right, great to see you all. 9:30 next week.
All right.
Thanks, Dean.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dean.
Yep.